At around 2:30 p.m. on the 24th of June 1967, 10 experienced cave explorers from the University of Leeds set out for a day of caving. Their destination was the Mossdale Cavern, a complex system of underground limestone caves located in the Yorkshire Dales in England. They left their vehicles at Conistone and trekked across the open fields, taking in the view of the rolling hills and the old stone walls that snaked through the landscape. The weather had been warm and dry all month, which made the short hike easy, and they soon arrived at a large limestone outcrop. They followed it round until they found the beck feeding into it. It was this beck, called the Mossdale Beck, that created the cave system they were searching for. It disappeared into the limestone formation, known as the Mossdale Scar, through several small gaps and holes that had been formed by the constant erosion. The group, led by David Adamson, headed towards one of these openings, knowing it to be the main entrance to the caverns below. The 10 of them geared up and quickly headed down into the dark cave, eager to start their exploration. For 6 of them, that would be the last time they ever saw daylight. Mossdale Caverns have always been known as an incredibly dangerous series of caves. Its tunnels were narrow, and many stretches required you to be completely flat against the rocky surface, using just your toes and fingers to slowly push through the passage. On top of this, due to the Mossdale Beck's proximity to the cave entrance and its location in the Yorkshire Dales water catchment area, it is very prone to flooding. But the 10 cavers weren't worried about that as they made their way further into the cave. The weather was good, and it hadn't rained in the previous days. They moved through the caverns at a reasonable pace. Having to crawl through some small pools of water and mud, they twisted and squoze through the tight openings in the rock, enjoying the challenge of traversing a technically demanding cave. After a couple of hours, the group reached an area of the caverns called Rough Passage, and it was here that 4 members of the group decided that this was far enough for them, and they headed back up to the surface. The remaining 6, all men, wanted to keep exploring just a little further, and so they squeezed under the large boulder in front of them and passed into an area known as Knee Wrecker Junction. As the name suggests, this area is very rugged, with bits of rock jutting out in all directions, and you would have to crawl on your hands and knees to pass through. While the 6 slowly made their way through the difficult section of limestone, the other 4 members of the group emerged from the entrance at about 5 p.m, and headed to the nearby shooting hut that they had designated as their waiting spot. It took them around 30 minutes to walk there, but with their arms and legs aching from the day's activities, it felt like it took much longer. They were all relieved to change out of their muddy and wet caving gear and rest in the small hut. As they sat and caught their breath, the sky began to darken slightly, and small specks of water began to fall. 3 members of the group, feeling tired and not wanting to sit in a drafty and leaky hut, decided to head back to the vehicles. But Morag Forbes, who was David Adamson's fiancée, said that she would stay and wait for the others. After waving goodbye to her friends, Forbes walked the 30 minutes back down to the cave entrance, and didn't notice anything amiss, the light rain not really causing any problems. Upon observing this, and not seeing her fiancé or the other man, she made her way back to the hut. Before long, however, the rain picked up significantly, followed by a deep rumbling. A thunderstorm swept quickly over the dales, lightning streaking across the hills. When the others still had not emerged by 9 p.m, she became worried, and once again headed back to the Mossdale Scar. Once she arrived at the opening to the cave, to her horror she saw that the beck was overflowing. The heavy rainfall had to go somewhere, and that somewhere was down into the Mossdale Caverns. Water was pouring into the holes in the limestone at an alarming rate, and Forbes realised with dread that with how narrow the tunnels down there were, it wouldn't take much to completely flood out the entire system, especially as the rain was still coming down. She immediately turned and ran 2.5 miles across the moors to raise the alarm. Due to the relatively secluded area that they were in, it took rescuers some time to reach the caverns, and it was almost 2 a.m. before any plans were put into place. The first port of call was to divert the Mossdale Beck, as it had by now completely submerged the main entrance to the cavern, which prevented any rescue workers from gaining access to the tunnels. This would take a significant amount of manpower, but as word got out about the trapped cavers, people began to flock to the scene to help, including many from Leeds, where the group had travelled from. As the sun came up, it revealed a mass of people, all working together to dig out a large trench. Along with mechanical help from excavators and tractors, and the fire brigade were using their large pumps to siphon the water out of the beck and into the man-made channel. A dam had been built across the beck close to the Mossdale Scar in an attempt to stop any more water from pouring into the caverns. The rain had mostly stopped by around 10 AM, with just occasional light showers periodically. This meant that the cavern should have had enough time to drain, at least at the higher levels. Volunteers constantly worked on keeping the dam stable, afraid that it would collapse and send a torrent of water into the caves below, undoing all the work that had been done overnight. By around 11:30 AM on Saturday the 5th of June, 20 hours after the group had originally entered the caves, rescuers prepared to descend into the Mossdale Caverns. They were quickly able to reach the area where the group had separated, rough passage, and set up telephone communications with the surface so that they could relay information back and forth. A team of 6 men, including some from the University of Leeds, were tasked with heading past this point to search for the missing cavers. They squeezed under the same boulder into Neareka Junction, and then continued past that area into a stretch of the system called Near Marathon. This area of the cave required them to crawl, and they could clearly see that this entire area had recently been completely underwater. The rescue team continued to push forward in silence, well aware of the dangerous situation they were in. The caverns groaned and gurgled around them, water still making its way through the limestone. I'm sure that they would have been hoping and praying for that dam up top to hold, their ears straining for the rushing sound of water sweeping up behind them. But despite this, the men continued, and after traversing all the way to Far Marathon, which is only around 10 inches high, they caught a glimpse of light ahead. It was the headlamp of one of the missing cavers. The rescue crew crawled forward quickly, wanting to find the owner of said lamp. They soon found them, laid just beyond their light, lifeless. Another body was just behind the first, and the rescuers felt any remaining hope drain out of them. Knowing that they were now almost certainly just looking for bodies, 5 of the rescuers crawled past the 2 deceased men, the space allowing just enough room for them to do so. One of the rescuers turned back at this point, possibly feeling claustrophobic or in shock. The remaining rescuers didn't have to crawl too much further to find another 3 bodies. All of the bodies were facing towards the entrance, indicating they had been on their way out of the cave system when the water had flooded in and drowned them. The rescue team, who had thought that there were only 5 missing people, decided to head back to Rough Passage to report what they had found to the surface. When they delivered the devastating news to those waiting up top, they were in turn told that they should immediately begin making their way out of the caves, as the dam was becoming increasingly unstable. The rescuers would later find out about the 6th missing person, but by that time another thunderstorm had swept in and the dam had failed, leading to the cavern flooding once more. It would take another 2 days before rescuers would be allowed to re-enter the cave, and they would eventually find the remaining body further down Far Marathon in the early hours of Wednesday morning. The names of the 6 men who perished were Michael Ryan, 17, Bill Frakes, 19, John Ogden, 21, Colin Vickers, 23, Jeff Boyru, 24, and David Adamson, 26. It was deemed too dangerous to risk any attempt at recovering the bodies, and so the dam was destroyed and the entrance to the cavern was sealed. An inquest was held in July 1967, during which it was concluded that the cause of death was death by misadventure. The jury also agreed that the decision to close the entrance had been correct, and so concrete was poured down the entrance to make the seal permanent. Many people, especially the families of the deceased and other cavers, were unhappy with this, as it meant that the 6 men would not be given a proper burial. And so, it's not unsurprising that in February 1971, with the permission of the families, a team of cavers found a way around the blocked-off entrance and climbed down into the depths with the intention of burying the men. It is unclear whether all of the bodies were able to be moved, but at least some of them were relocated to the high-level mud caverns, which sit on higher ground and therefore do not get flooded out. The team carefully buried the remains in an area of the mud caverns which would be renamed the Sanctuary, and this serves as the final resting place for the men. A plaque sits outside the sealed entrance to the caverns, bearing the names of those who lost their lives. A cairn was also constructed on the moor above the cavern, with a plaque which reads, Mossdale Memorial Cairn, over the place in the cave where the bodies were found. Although strictly off limits, there are still those who seek to explore the Mossdale Caverns. I'm sure that anyone that does venture down there does so with the knowledge that they may not come back out. If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing to the channel and leave a comment down below with any suggestions for future videos. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you again next time.